Hello everyone, name is Bootstrap Studios once again, and today it's time to do a review video. And the last video I reviewed a game that a lot of people don't like, Modern Warfare 3 2023 reboot. But now, in this review video, I'm going to review a game that I still play to this day, that I love a lot. And that, my dear friends, is Dead by Daylight. An asymmetrical 1v4 survival horror game. Now, before we get to the point of talking about the game, I do want to discuss something that I think we should go back to many years ago. So many years ago, there was these certain games called asymmetrical games. Basically, these new types of games that we were never familiar with before back then. Basically, it's like certain games where it's like, it's basically another us versus them sort of game, but this time's a little bit different. It's like a one player versus multiple players. So like, kind of like if one player is a boss, an enemy boss, and the other players are just regular characters that are trying to defeat the boss. Something like that. There were games like that during that time. Evolve, which is dead as fuck, and definitely some other asymmetrical games I never heard of before, but I'm sure they were out there. Asymmetrical games were new back then. However, they don't last that long. And then ever since then, there has been, well, companies that have been trying to do some experiments with that similar games. The asymmetrical games, of course. And a company known as Behavior Interactive, who is definitely well known for a game called Naughty Bear, by the way, they created Dead by Daylight, which was pretty much their passion project. And the game did came out somewhere in 2016, and the game was pretty, well, new and fresh, and it had a pretty good start. Even though there were some controversial things back then, but usually they does end up patching those things later on. Or probably like weeks or later, or months or later. Or years, because, you know, this was back then, so we're talking about old behavior here, out of all things. So, you know, like, you know, Dead by Daylight started off good, started off fresh, and probably like most people, not me, because I don't know, most people would have expected the game to eventually die out too in a few months later. However, that wasn't the case, as Dead by Daylight has been lasting all the way throughout this very day. And I think we all know why. You see, when the game first came out, we started off with certain survivors to play as and certain killers to play as. We got survivors like Meg Thomas, Dwight, Jake, and of course, Claudette, and some later ones that we get in certain updates too. And then we got the characters that we started off with, like Trapper, Hillbilly, Wraith, and then eventually later on, like later killers as well, like Nurse and Huntress. You get the cake here. However, the whole reason this game never fucking died was because of one fucking thing. Licenses. You see, years ago, they did a thing called chapters. And the first ever chapter they really did was Nurse, I believe. I don't know. But they released their second chapter in Dead by Daylight. Or I think it was a second, I don't know. But there was a chapter they released though. And it was the first ever license they ever added in Dead by Daylight. Halloween. Yes, I'm talking about Halloween, the horror movie, Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, Haddonfield, all of that shit is in the game. And ever since that chapter came out, the player base was hyped. People played the game to play as that character, to play as their favorite horror movie characters. And just like that, the game became very, very, very popular. And as years go by, there has been, more updates have been going on. New events, like in-game events, new characters, new licensed characters too from other franchises. New cosmetics being added as well. New perks, patches patches of like certain changes they make within the game. So many, so much, so more. And yeah, as time goes on, we get a shit ton of stuff. Now we have like what, 30 something fucking killers now or some shit, and a shit ton of survivors to play as. Yeah, and that's a lot of shit they add in. Hundreds and hundreds of different choices of perks to the point you can make different builds and stuff. That's fucking insane. And speaking of which, just recently, well, not just recently, but like recently at this point, they add in the new chapter, All Things Wicked, which is a new map, new killer, which is the unknown, and a new survivor save award. Now, I do want to actually talk about the chapter in a separate video. The problem is the only things I experience are the new map, the unknown's perks. By the last thing I have to experience is Sable Ward. So I have to really grind the game just to get Sable Ward so I can try out her perks. And then I might make a video explaining what I think about the whole chapter and everything. I mean, then again, I did try out Sable Ward's perks in a custom game, but that was really it. But anyways, let's get to the point. Let's finally talk about the game. So, what is Dead by Daylight? Dead by Daylight, obviously, an asymmetrical horror game. So, let's talk about the first thing I want to discuss first. The survivors. The survivors' objective is to basically, complete 5 generators. And there are 7 generators separated around certain maps. And there's multiple maps too. But yeah, they are split it up around a certain spot in a map. And you basically just, you run up or walk up to a gen and you just hold a certain button. That's really it. Survivor doesn't really have much to it. Like, you just hold a certain button on a gen and eventually you complete it. However, the only thing that kind of hypes up at least a tiny bit is this thing called skill check. Now, skill checks is basically a quick time event where you basically, you have to wait for like a certain white line to okay, so it's like a circle, right? And there's like a white line spinning around counterclockwise. You have to click a certain button. Okay, so there's like a tiny white line of the circle, and then there's like a big line of the circle. You have to hit the white line that is spinning to the big spot of the circle to succeed in the skill check. That, however, if you end up clicking the button at the wrong time, and you just don't hit the time, you don't hit the skill check. It's very hard to explain it, sorry. But if you don't hit the skill check at all, or you press the button while the white line is hitting the tiny smaller lines, you will fail the skill check and the generator will explode. And the skill check doesn't just only happen with the generators either. It could happen in many other interactions, where you're healing your teammates, or when you're on the entity's hook and you have to struggle against the entity when you're on second stage hook. That's pretty much how it goes. Now back then, when you're on second stage, the skill check thing wasn't a thing. Back then, when you're in second stage, you have to spam the shit out of a fucking button just to prevent yourself from getting killed. Which, yeah, that can kill your fingers real quick. Which is why behavior eventually added in now it's just a skill check thing. So we got, and of course survivors can't just only do generators. There's other things they can do as well. They can search around the map for chests. And when you open chests, you can get items, such as medkits, toolbox, maps, keys. And I'll talk about the items in a moment here. And the next thing they can do is go around the map to find these things called totems. Now, totems are basically they're these weird skulls that are sitting around these weird sticks. You walk up to it or run up to it, And once you go out your way to interact with the skulls or totems, you just hold a button. There's no skill checks on those, obviously, and there's no skill checks on chests either. So you just run up to it, hold a button, and eventually you just cleanse the totem. However, there's 3 types of totems. There's a dull totem, which really just does fucking nothing. It's just sitting there waiting for you to cleanse it so you can get blood points. Then there's the hex totem, where basically hex totems are the same as a dull totem, except they're on fire, like they are ignited in flames a bit. Which means, and you actually have to cleanse the hex totem, because the hexes are actually perks that killers can run. And hex perks are the most strongest perks in the entire game. So you have to fucking find the hex totems and cleanse that shit, or else, yeah, you're most likely gonna be fucked. The cool thing about hex totems is that when you cleanse it, you actually get more blood points than the dull totem. Then we get to the last totem, which is the boon totem. Now the boon totem is basically similar to the hex, but instead of it being ignited in like a orangish sort of color, the boon is pretty much a totem ignited in a bluish color. And the boon totems are ones that help survivors. So basically, the boon totems are survivors' versions of the hex totems. Now, the only difference with the hex and boon totems is that when you cleanse, or when you get rid of the hex totem, the hex perk is gone forever. But when the killer snuffs out the boon totem, nothing happened. You can just boon it up again, you know? Oh yeah, and if you're running like a certain... Oh yeah, that's because, there's also different types of perks as well, which I'll get to in a moment as well. And boon perks, basically when you're in a certain like radius of, the boon, like a certain meter close to it, you'll get like a power, like a superpower sort of. Like haste, fast healing speed, you name it. Alright. Now let's get to oh yeah, and the next thing about it is once you complete all 5 generators, you basically can you 2 exit gates will be powered up. You find one, you go to the lever, you hold the button, and you eventually open it, and you can get the fuck out. That's it. That's all you have to do as Survivor. But like specifically, all you gotta do as Survivor is just complete 5 generators, get out. That's it. That's really the gameplay loop of Survivor. Now, the next thing I am going to talk about are items. Now, items are basically items that you collect from either the blood web and you can equip it before playing a match, or you can just randomly find them at chests and stuff. And they can be useful for many things. We got medkits. Medkits are actually used to either heal your teammates faster, or you can specifically use them to heal yourself, which is, a good thing. And then we got the toolboxes, which are used for sabotaging hooks or doing generators a bit faster. There are some that are mainly used for generators anyway. However, there is one toolbox, well actually there's 2. There's 2 toolboxes that can be useful for sabotaging hooks. And when you sabotage a hook, basically how you do it is that you need to have a toolbox, obviously. You walk up to a hook, you hold a certain button, boom, you sabotage the hook, and you get blood points for it. And what happens next is that eventually the hook does come back. Like, it doesn't stay sabotaged. Back then it would stay sabotaged forever, but the behavior patched that, and now, like, eventually the hook does come back. And then we got keys, which keys are basically meant to open the hatch. Now, there's another thing I'm going to talk about, the hatch. What is the hatch? Well, the hatch is basically a mechanic in the match where a hatch will open at a random spot in the map. And how that happens is that 3 survivors have to be dead. Once 3 survivors are dead and you are the last survivor alive, the hatch will spawn at a random spot of the map. You either find it or the killer finds it and closes it. And basically, if it gets closed by the killer, then the exit gates will power and the end game collapse will start, which is basically a timer. And if that timer hits 0, you're dead. Yeah. Anyways, so the keys are actually meant for the hatch. So basically, how it goes is that if the killer does actually find the hatch, and you know where the hatch could be at, you can just simply, sneak around it if the killer's nearby, or if the killer's not nearby, you can just run around until you find it. You go near the hatch, you hold a certain button, boom, you use the key, you open the hatch, you escape. Good, bravo you. And then we got the last item types, the maps. Now the maps are basically meant to track down certain stuff. And sadly, it's only 2 maps, and there's about to be a 3rd map pretty soon because of the event. Basically, they're meant to track stuff for you, which can be useful in most scenarios. The next items I'm going to talk about are flashlights. Flashlights are simply used to blind the killer, or to blind the killer while they're carrying a survivor to save the survivor, to help the survivor wiggle off the killer. And that's another thing too. When you do get chased by the killer, that's also a thing I forgot to mention as well. When you're getting chased by the killer. So let's talk about the killers for just a moment. So when you're a survivor, when the killer is getting around you at some point, there is this mechanic called a terror radius. Now the terror radius, basically, how this works is it's a heartbeat. It's a heartbeat sound effect that you will constantly hear over and over again. So, how the heartbeat or the terror radius works is that, it pretty much detects how close the killer is. If the killer is far, the heartbeat will slow down a bit. If the killer gets a little nearby, it will go a little faster. But if the killer is like close to you, like he has to be fucking near you somehow, the heartbeat will be fucking beating faster and faster, pretty much detecting how close the killer is, which is pretty easy to get used to. Like once you get used to the terror radius, you'll pretty much know, like, okay, like you know when the killer's far, you'll know when the killer's close. It's simple shit. And once the killer actually does start chasing you, yeah, you better fucking run. And there are certain resources that can help you. Pallets, which are basically these like wooden things that you will eventually find when you're trying to run from the killer. You run to them, you can drop them down, that way the killer will have to kick them and such. And you can also use the pallets to stun the killer as well if they get near the pallet enough too. And then there's windows, which basically you can vault through the windows. And you can do it 3 certain ways. You got the very slow vault, the slow vault, and you got the fast vault. Now the very slow vault is when you're just walking towards it and then you click a button to vault it. Your character will vault it very slowly. This can be used to, well, sneak around so you don't, distract the killer and such. Or alert the killer. Because if you vault it too fast, yeah, it's going to alert the killer pretty much. And then there's slow vault, where you run to it, but you're not running to it to a straight line. So you do vault fast, but not fast enough to the point the killer might hit you while doing that. Then there's fastball, where you are straight up running to a window, and when you click the button at the right time, your character will just whoop, fucking vault through that shit like it's nothing. And oh yeah, you can vault through pallets as well, by the way. And of course, the killer can vault through windows too, but they vault slower than you, so yeah. And another thing, that I want to discuss about, the skill checks. When you fail, okay, so when you do certain things, there will be, it will do a noise notification for the killer, alerting the killer of your location. If you fail a skill check on a generator, if it explodes, it will make a loud noise, like a loud boom noise, and it alerts the killer to where your location's at. if you vault a window too fast, or vault a pallet too fast, or drop the pallet, it will do the same thing. It will make a loud boom noise for the killer, and it'll alert the killer, letting them know your location. Well, your current location. Because by the time they get there, you'll probably be gone by now. But that depends. Now, and of course, now I'm going to talk about another thing. What happens if the killer finally downs you? So, if the killer finally downs you, the killer can pick you up and will put you on a hook called a sacrificial hook. Now, now the killer does put you on the sacrificial hook, you pretty much can't do anything after that. You are stuck in that hook until you unhook yourself, which is luck-based, by the way. Don't do that, it's risky. Or you just wait for your teammate to come and save you from the hook. And there's 2 stages, and you have to be hooked 3 times to die. The first time you get hooked, nothing really happens. You're just stuck on the hook until you get rescued. The second stage hook, when you get hooked the second time, the entity, which is pretty much, the big baddie of the entire game, the entity, will show up and try to kill you, and you have to hit those skill checks to avoid getting harmed by it. Because when the entity does deal damage to you, oh yeah, when you're on the hook, there's like a bar on your character's HUD. And when that bar goes to half, that's when the entity shows up, of course, by the way. But, when the entity does damage your character, the bar goes down a bit. So you gotta make sure it doesn't do that. Because if you do take damage from the entity, you're fucked, kind of. It depends how the situation goes. And if you actually end up, getting hooked a third time, or that bar empties out, you die. That's it. And then you just go back to the lobby, you ready up for another match. So basically, it's an infinite loop of either you escaping or you dying over and over again. And sometimes you escape, sometimes you die. It's just how the gameplay loop goes. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is now we talked enough about survivors finally. Now we can talk about the killer. So the killers. Probably my favorite role obviously my favorite role of this entire game, by the way, the killers. Killers are basically this unstoppable slashers. Because this is pretty much a slasher-based game, based around slasher films and such. You are basically like these unstoppable slashers that have their own unique powers that will benefit them throughout matches. There are certain killers that have powers that are really good, and killers that have certain powers that are not so good but still can be beneficial. And the killer's objective is to kill the survivors, but not just straight up kill them once you down them. No, when the trial starts, you have to look for them. And honestly, you most likely have to search around generators, since that's most likely where the survivors will be anyway. And once you find a survivor, you chase them, get pallets, get loot by them, yada yada. You eventually, you just chase them, and then eventually you have to smack them, they get injured, then you chase them again, then you smack them while they're injured, you down them. So you have to hit them 2 times, pretty much, to down them. And when you do down them, you have to pick them up, and then you gotta take them somewhere to the hook. But you gotta be fast about it, because while you're carrying a survivor, the survivor can wiggle out. So you gotta be quick about taking the survivor to a hook. And when you do get close to a hook, you put the survivor on the hook, and there you go. Boom. They're on a hook. You hook the survivor 3 times, or the survivor just stays on hook, and the bar just goes down to emptiness, and the survivor will die. However, the survivor's teammates can save them too, of course. But yeah, once you hook that survivor, then you gotta find someone else, and basically the cycle repeats. And the survivors you chase will the survivors that you chase will either last a while, or they will, not do much, and you down them pretty quickly. And of course, you gotta kick pallets if they ever drop them and such, and you can vault windows. Oh, and there's another thing you can do as a killer as well. Remember the generators that you can do as survivor? Well, as killer, you can actually kick the generators too, if there's any progress on them. And when you kick a generator, it will spark up, and it will start regressing. And the only way for the survivors to stop it from regressing is to get on the generator and work on it again. That's really all I have to say about Killer. That's really all I have to say about Killer. Nothing much, nothing less. Now the next thing I'm going to talk about are the perks. Specifically, let's talk about survivor perks though. Now I'm not going to explain. Now I'm not going to talk about every fucking perk because this will make this video long as shit. But I'm going to talk about like certain perks. You know, certain types of perks. So for survivors, you got regular perks. Then you got boom perks, teamwork perks, and then you got the new perk type that came out with the new chapter, invocation. So regular perks are basically perks that have, you know, they're basic stuff that you can use for your benefits. And by the way, let's just talk about perks in general. So perks in Dead by Daylight are basically like extra equipment that you can equip on your character. And they will benefit you in most ways. And then we got another thing that's basically like perks, but it's for items or for the killer power you're using. When you're using an item as a survivor or playing as killer, you can use a thing called add-ons. And add-ons are basically used to benefit your killer's power, or when you're a survivor, it benefits the item you're using. And then there's another thing you can equip called offerings, which basically offerings pretty much make certain things happen within the match. There are offerings that give you extra blood points, which are the in-game currency that you can use to level up your characters, or prestige them as well, of course. Then there's offerings where, you know, there's offerings where it sends you to a certain map you want to go. Or there's like many different fucking offerings. You get the point. Now we go back to perks. So perks basically are equipment so you can equip on your character's loadout to benefit you in certain ways. So let's talk about regular perks first. The regular perks are basically, you know, there's certain things you have to do, but they're at least basic in their own way. Some of these simple perks are easy to use, and there are some that are actually hard as fuck to use. Then we get boon perks. Remember the whole boon totem show I was talking about? That's where the boon perks comes in. So boon perks are basically like this. They're basically like hexes for survivors. So you gotta go around the map, and you gotta find a dull totem or a hex totem, and you walk up to it, and instead of clicking a button to cleanse it, you click a different button to bless it. Now, dull totems, they don't take too long to bless, but when you're doing it to a hex totem, they can take some extra time. When you do bless either of these totems, the totem will light up in a blue flamey-like look, which means the boon is activated. And, And once the boon's activated, your perk's activated too. Now, how boons work is that when you do bless a totem, you have to be a certain meter, like, close to it to have your perk activated. There are certain boon perks that do benefit you in certain ways as well. Are they useful though? Well, they can be useful in certain situations, of course, but not specifically all the time. Then we got teamwork perks, which are a third type of survivor perk. Which, there's only 2 teamwork perks, by the way, so there's really not much. But teamwork perks, basically how they're supposed to work is that, I guess you do something and the perk activates, giving you a specific effect. The sad part is, there's only 2 perks, so, you know, there's not really much I can say about the teamwork perks there. Now we got the new type of perk, Invocation, which came with the new Survivor Save award for the new chapter. Which again, I'll make a separate video talking about. Invocation, how they work is basically, you go to the basement, And when you go to a basement, there'll be this like weird white circle that you can walk to interact. And when you do decide to interact with that weird circle, you're basically doing a ritual. Your character will just sit there and will do the ritual. And the ritual will take like 2 minutes to complete. However, when you're doing an invocation, survivors can see you through walls, or aura reading. Now, aura reading is basically just wall hacks pretty much. But it's not like fucking hacks at all. It's just, you can see people through walls because, there are certain perks or certain killer powers maybe that will track you through walls and stuff. But for like a few seconds or so it's not that deep. But anyways, when you do, so when a survivor does decide to do the ritual with you, the ritual will actually go a little bit faster. See? However, when it comes with invocation perks, if that survivor is running invocation perk 2, it will make your ritual go even more faster. And once the ritual is complete, a certain good effect will happen, but at a cost of you, the player who used the perk, will receive a bad effect. There's only one invocation perk right now, which is called Weaving Spiders, where basically if you complete that ritual, all generators will take less time to complete now, but the only downside is that you are broken for the entire game. And when I mean broken, I'm talking about status effects, which I will get to in a moment right now since I'm done with talking about perks. Status effects. So, Survivor has many status effects that they will suffer through. Oblivious, Mangled, Hemorrhage, Blindness, and of course, Exposed, which is the dangerous one of them all, and of course, Broken. Let's go on about them, shall we? So, Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage basically makes it so when you have your healing bar filled up, basically hemorrhage is when you have it's something to do with healing. So it's like an anti-healing status effect. When you're being healed by a teammate and that teammate stops healing you, your healing progress will start resetting, meaning it will reset all the way back to emptiness and you have to get healed all the way up again. But that's only if that survivor stops healing you though. Then we got Mangled, which pretty much makes it so your healing speed is slower, obviously. Well, survivors healing you is slowly because you're mangled. Then we got Blindness, which is pretty much the most weakest, status effect in the entire game for a survivor. Blindness is where you basically cannot see auras of, the survivors or the killer. So you can't see things through walls pretty much for a certain amount of time. Because you're blind. But then again, this is the weakest status effect in the entire game. Even though there is a certain hex perk that does make blindness pretty strong. But that's not the case. Then there's oh yeah, and there's another status effect as well. And there's also other ones too. There's Cursed. Where basically Cursed, basically it lets you know that there's a hex perk around. So if the killer's running a hex and, something happens to you that has something to do with the hex, you'll get the status effect called Curse. Which, it won't do anything to you, but it's pretty much alerting you that there's a hex totem nearby and you will have to get rid of it. Then we got Oblivious, which is probably a pretty dangerous one. Well, one of the dangerous ones at least. Oblivious makes it so that you are no longer affected by the tear radius. So you have no fucking idea if the killer is close to you or not. You don't know where the killer is going to come from then until it's too late. And then we get Expose, which is the most dangerous status effect of them all. Expose is basically you are insta down. If the killer smacks you with their weapon, you will instantly go into dying state no matter if you're full healed or not. If you are full healed and you get smacked, that's it. You're fucking down. You're fucking done. That's really it. And then we get to other status effects, there's a status effect called Madness, which honestly, that's for a certain killer called the Doctor. So I don't think I should really explain what madness does. But there is one last side effect I want to talk about. I forgot what it's called, but basically how that's sad. But there are certain killers and perks that can, inflict that status event as well. Well, not well. There's not. Well, there used to be a perk that inflicts a status event, but not anymore. Now it's just a killer, and well, two killers that can do that. So what that status event does is that when you are inflicted by that status effect, you can't do anything. You can't do a gen. You can't freaking interact with stuff pretty much. So that's pretty much that status effect. Again, I forgot what that status effect is called, but that's what it does. Now we get status effect for killers. And their status effect are, basically status effect that benefits them instead of going against them. So the first status effect we're going to talk about for killers is undetectable. Now undetectable, basically what that does is that it hides your red stain. Which, what a red stain is for the killer is that when you're a survivor, when the killer arrives, you'll actually see like a red light coming out of their body, which is a red stain. Basically, the red stain is there for let survivors to know which direction the killer is looking at. But undetectable pretty much gets rid of the red stain, pretty much. And the red stain is also there to let survivors know, like, where the killer's coming from as well. But yeah. So undetectable hides your red stains, hides your tear radius, and does hide your aura reading as well. So undetectable is actually a pretty useful one in most scenarios as well. And yes, it gets rid of your tear radius, which means the survivors will not even know where you're coming from. So it's like Oblivious, but it's like a status so it's kind of like, it's survivors suffering from Oblivious, except it's for all survivors, because you're pretty much stealthy at this point, for a limited time, of course. So that's Oblivious, that's undetectable. And what's the next status effect? Oh, I forgot there is one more status effect that I forgot to say. And it actually benefits both survivors and killers. Haste. Now, what haste does is that it's simple. It makes your fucking character move faster. It makes your killer move faster, and it can make your survivor move faster. That's pretty much what haste does. And there is one more status effect I forgot to mention as well, which can be inflicted by both killers and survivors too. Hindered. Hindered pretty much makes you move slower. Yes, so it's pretty much the bad version of haste. Haste makes you move faster. Hindered makes you slow as shit like a snail. Honestly, I think that's all I really have to explain. Now, the last thing I'm going to really talk about is, actually, no, there's two more things I want to talk about before I finally end this video. Holy shit, this video is 38 minutes long. I do want to talk about the killer perks as well. And there's basically certain types, of course. We got the regular killer perks, hex perks, and scourge hooks. So the regular killer perks, I'm not going to really talk about them because I already talked about how the regular survivor perks works. Simple perks, you have to activate them by doing certain stuff, blah, blah, blah. What else? Hex perks. Basically, hex perks is when a trial starts, and when a trial starts, you have your hex perk will be activated, which means that hex totem will be surrounded somewhere in the map. And basically, like I said, the hex perks are the most powerful perks for killers in the entire game, which is why they're hex perks. You have to get rid of them. And they can benefit you in many ways too. And however, once that hex totem is destroyed or blessed, your hex perk will deactivate for the rest of the match. So yeah, you pretty much lose it once that shit gets destroyed. Then we got scourge hooks, which is the third type of killer hook. So scourge hooks, what do? Well, scourge hooks pretty much make it so... Okay, so you know the sacrificial hooks, right? So when you're killer, when you're picking up survivor, okay, so you'll basically tell the difference between the scourge hooks when you're killer. So when you're killer, you know, the sacrificial hook looks like a normal hook. However, when you equip a scourge hook, you'll see the difference. You'll notice that the scourge hook looks a little different. It's got like this white glowing over it. And when you pick up survivor, the scourge hook's aura will be white instead of your usual red color. Basically what scourge hooks do is that when you put a survivor on that scourge hook, it'll basically give like an effect. Like it will give an effect. Like there is a scourge hook that damages a generator. There's a scourge hook that will give you like a status effect. Well, a survivor status effect. And then there's like a scourge hook that... Basically the scourge hooks, like, you know, there's like different types of scourge hooks perks. You know, like depending on what you're using, you can get value out of it. But scourge hooks, you know, you hook a survivor on a scourge hook or the white hook, and there you go. It basically gives an effect that will benefit you, the killer. I do want to mention one small detail real quick. When you're a killer and when you're carrying a survivor, if you get blinded or stunned by a pallet, while carrying a survivor, you'll drop the survivor and you get stunned too. So, just let you know that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about to end the video here is how the last thing I want to talk about is how the game is getting better and better and growing as time goes on. Like I mentioned, the only reason this game is still alive this very day because of licenses pretty much. Yeah, there are original chapters as well, but the licenses specifically are the reason why this game is still alive. If it wasn't for behavior to add in the Halloween chapter and Dead by Daylight in the first place, the game would have been dead years ago by now. Like, it would have been gone. It would have been forgotten. But that's not the case, because they added licensed characters in it. Specifically, Michael Myers from Halloween. But the point I'm trying to make is that the game is good. It's a really great video game. Probably one of the best video games I have ever played. Yes, I know. In my other videos, I did rant about certain things on the game. Specifically, the toxic community. But I will say this. The toxic community is not enough for me to dislike this game. I love this game to death ever since... I actually played the game back in 2017, but I didn't play it that much. And I deleted it at some point. But when I came out to the game, like many years later, after not touching it, loved the game to death. One of the best games I have ever played in my entire life. And I am glad that I get to actually enjoy this game for what it is. So, what do I think about Dead by Daylight? How do I rate Dead by Daylight? Well, I rate Dead by Daylight a fucking 10 out of 10. I'm dead serious. I'm giving that game a 10 out of 10. I love the game that much to the point I am willing to fucking play it more often. Yes, I am giving it a fucking 10 out of 10. Probably one of the best games I have ever played in general. Probably one of the best video games I've ever played in general. Alongside with like Call of Duty and all that. So yeah, that's really all I have to say for this game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review video. If you guys liked it, make sure to leave a comment down below. If you want to see more uploads like this, hit that subscribe button to hit that notification bell. And I understand that this was a long fucking video, but I just had so much to talk about this game. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.